The long-awaited Leigh Whannell-directed Wolfman is now in theaters. This is a movie that I've been looking forward to for a long time, and it turns out to be a bold and very different reimagining of this classic monster. Well, I don't know if that's totally accurate, to be honest with you. It's kind of more a mundane reimagining. Hello everybody, welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. And I did just see The Wolfman in theaters. I'm very excited to talk to you about it. And it's a movie I've been looking forward to for a long time. It was actually originally announced in 2014. It was going to be a part of Universal's Dark Universe. Do you guys remember that? When they were going to make this action horror MCU style thing out of the classic monsters, they kicked it off with the Tom Cruise, The Mummy, and there was also Dracula Untold. And after those films were not well received at all, didn't make a lot of money at the box office, critics and audiences alike mostly didn't like them, especially The Mummy. They ended up basically scrapping the whole thing, but in 2020, Leigh Whannell made The Invisible Man, and this really renewed interest in the classic monsters. I think that film was successful because it did not take the Universal monsters to some kind of action place. It didn't make it a blockbuster. It took it back to being a horror movie. Now, while that Invisible Man movie has very little in common with the original The Invisible Man, it's trying to be intense, it's trying to be scary, and I think people really appreciated that. I personally really liked it. And since that caused renewed interest in the Universal monsters, Universal accepted a pitch for a Wolfman movie from Ryan Gosling. Yes, Ryan Gosling was going to star in The Wolfman. I was super excited for that when that got announced. Apparently it was going to be like a Nightcrawler type movie about some kind of sleazy journalist who turns into a werewolf. It was going to be directed by the guy who made Blue Valentine and The Place Beyond the Pines. This all sounded great to me. But you guys know what happened in 2020, and then not long after that, there were the strikes, tons of delays, and by the time the film finally was getting off the ground, those two people were no longer available. And a lot of other things completely changed about the script. When Leigh Whannell came in, him and his wife both worked on a lot of rewriting. They were honestly very inspired by the pandemic and by the isolation they were going through when they were writing this, making a Wolfman movie that is more about isolation and disease than anything else. The Wolfman movie that we ended up getting is about Blake and his family. With his marriage kind of falling apart, he decides to take his family to his father's house in Oregon after his father has just passed away to pack up his stuff. It is in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Oregon. So they're going for a nice getaway, but there they are attacked by a man-like beast, and Blake starts going through some changes. Yes, it is directed by Leigh Whannell, and it's starring Christopher Abbott, Julia Gardner, Matilda Firth, and Sam Yeager. So what were my expectations for this film? Now, I am a colossal fan of the original The Wolfman. I would put it in my top 5 horror movies of all time. It's a perfect film for me. The cast, the setting, the classic but tragic story that it tells, the characters, how much I care about Larry Talbot. It's perfect. I adore it. But going into this remake, I expected it to be a good movie, but I did not expect it to be satisfying as a Wolfman fan. Reason for that, I expected it to be good because it's Leigh Whannell. I think every movie that he has directed in the past has been good. Insidious 3, Upgrade, and The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man, I think, is the best of them, but they're all solid. I didn't expect anything less from this one, but I didn't expect it to be satisfying as a Wolfman movie because I knew the plot. I knew it wasn't going to be the same story at all. And judging by Leigh Whannell's Invisible Man, I knew that he is not the guy to make classic versions of these stories. His Invisible Man has almost nothing in common with the original The Invisible Man film or the H.G. Wells story. It's completely its own thing. It really has much more in common with 90s thrillers than any Invisible Man movie that you might see. But it's still a really good movie, and what it adds in makes up for it, and it works. That's what I expected from Wolfman. But in that regard, the stakes for this film were low because I already have a modern Wolfman remake, the one that came out in 2010. And to be honest with you, that movie is really, really good, especially the director's cut. I love that film, and it is everything you could want out of a Wolfman remake. It has the classic story, the period recreation, a fantastic version of the Wolfman, a brilliant design, vicious werewolf werewolf sequences. It is Wolfman fan service, the film. It's like pretty much perfect for that, and I really enjoy it. And I didn't necessarily need this version to be that again. I was okay with something different. But to be honest with you, a good movie, but not quite a good Wolfman movie, that's not exactly what I got, so let's talk about it. Now, first of all, the setting of the film I really did like. It's not in period setting, of course. It takes place in the mountains of Oregon in isolation. It's a beautiful setting. They actually filmed it in New Zealand, to be honest with you. Now, the characters in the cast, it's about a somewhat dysfunctional family, really just because it seems like the husband and wife are kind of growing apart. The husband is a stay-at-home dad, and he is a very good dad. He's very close with his daughter, and while the wife is working a lot as a journalist, she's just kind of drifting apart from both of them. And that's really all we know. We don't get any additional explanation to that. There's very little time spent on them as people or their relationship. Christopher Abbott plays the husband. I think the only thing I know him from is Possessor, the Brandon Cronenberg movie. And based on the two films I've seen with him, I find him to be a pretty nondescript actor. He's fine, but there's just nothing that pops about him. And then Julia Gardner is the wife. She was like my first big problem with this movie. I did not care for her at all. A big problem with her is she looks so young. She looks like a teenager, to be honest with you. I looked up the actress's age, and she's 30, so she's almost 10 years younger than Christopher Abbott, but 30, that's fine. But her real age doesn't really matter for the movie. It matters how she comes across on screen, and she looks like a teenager. Like, it looks more like Christopher Abbott and his two daughters, but she's supposed to be the successful journalist. She's a mother to a 10-ish year old girl, and it's not believable, and she doesn't come across mature at all. It's not even just her looks, and the performance is just really dull. I found her to be a very dull character, and Christopher Abbott wasn't that much better, to be honest. Like, he was a little more charismatic, maybe, but not much. Extremely little time is setting these people up. We begin with a prologue that's probably the best part of the movie, to be honest with you, that doesn't feature either of these actors. They very briefly set up that they're going to go up to Oregon, and then one thing that I didn't care for is as soon as they get to Oregon, the horror starts. The scary movie tropes start rolling in. And I would have appreciated more setup, to be honest with you. I would have rather got to know these characters, got to care about them more, had them settle in this new place before they start to figure out the horrors that lurk in the woods. Instead, it's just like immediate. It's kind of like if you watch Pet Sematary, and as soon as this family moves to this small town in Maine, the truck comes rolling by in that scene. You know what I'm talking about? But, Pet Sematary is smart enough not to do that. It sets up these people, it sets up the lore and the story first, and then it gets into that. But I know what you're thinking, Daniel, we don't really care about this stuff. The characters, the atmosphere, whatever. What about the Wolfman? Now, this movie is part of a current trend in marketing, horror movie marketing, of hiding your monster. To be honest with you, I could take or leave that trend. I mean, I think it's cool to put your monster on the poster. I think that's fun. This whole hiding it thing feels kind of like a gimmick to me, especially when there is not that much to hide, to be honest with you. But the Wolfman in this film, it's just pretty mundane. Like, they took away so much about what makes werewolves interesting and left us with not that much at all. Now, clearly the metaphor they're going for in this movie is werewolves as disease, not as a supernatural curse. To me, that takes away so much of what I love about werewolves, and it also makes the whole thing, frankly, more ridiculous. The idea of a werewolf is an extremely unrealistic idea. But the point is, it's magic, it's fantasy, it is ancient curses. And that's why you buy into it in a movie. When you take away all of that and just say it's a disease, it's a fever, it's a virus, it actually gets more ridiculous because this could not be a disease. Nothing works like this. The design itself of the Wolfman is not as bad as I expected. Universal actually rolled out a version of their design at Halloween Horror Nights a few months ago. You might have remembered that. The horror community was freaking out about it because it looked absolutely terrible. It kind of just looked like a crazy old man and nothing like a werewolf. What I will say is there's nothing in this movie that looks exactly like that. I see where that came from, and it's not totally off, but it just comes across so much better on screen. So I was not terribly unhappy with the Wolfman designs that you get here. I mean, they're not going to be making action figures of these things anytime soon, I'll tell you that. It's certainly not a great design. There are dozens of werewolf designs in other movies that are so much better. Leigh Whannell actually said he was inspired by Heath Ledger Joker as the design. That just bums me out. That's just such an obviously bad idea, I think. But it's fine. It's okay. It's actually a little more of an actual Wolfman movie than I expected. But almost all of the classic tropes, the classic ideas around werewolves are gone, and they don't add anything new. That's the thing that gets me, because the Invisible Man is almost nothing like the classic Invisible Man, but they added so much, they made it such a complete, unique story that it worked. But the Wolfman is a very small story. Like, it's just, there's not much here. There's very little story. It is a slow movie, but not like a slow burn, because I tend to I like slow burn movies. I don't mean that it takes a while to set things up and to get into the horror. That's typically what I think of as a slow burn. What I mean is everything that does happen just takes a long time. Everything that happens slowly, and it makes it feel like the movie's just kind of stretched out, because it's this very small story that they just kind of stretched artificially to feature length, and that makes it feel kind of dull. It makes me question why they made this movie at all. When you already have a really good Wolfman remake, what's the point of making another Wolfman movie if you're just gonna shrink it down, simplify it, make it this small little thing? You know, not to compare it too much with Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, because, you know, that's not really fair. They're movies at very different levels, but we all just saw a version of a classic monster that did everything it could to make it like the best version ever. I'm not saying it was the best version ever, but you could see the filmmakers were trying. They made it big and grand and epic and operatic. And then they make a Wolfman movie, and it's just this little thing. It's just this tiny little thing. They just took away almost everything you like, left you with not much, and it's this tiny little story. And I question why. What is the point of that? Okay, lots of negativity, but to get a little bit more positive, I think the sound design in this film is fantastic. The sounds of the Wolfman is great. I love the way the Wolfman sounds, not necessarily how it looks, but how it sounds. There's one really great jump scare in this movie that, isn't just like the loud noise. It's a legitimate jump scare that I thought was really good, but there's not much of that in the film, This movie is not very entertaining, and it's not much fun. And you might say, well, it's a horror movie. It's not supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be dark and disturbing. But it's none of those things either. It's none of those things. So at least it could be fun and energizing to watch and get your heart pumping. But it's none of those things. I don't think it's horrible. I think it's watchable enough. I think the Wolfman stuff isn't as bad as it could have been, but it's just a clear example of a mediocre movie that doesn't do much with the werewolf legend. And when you compare it to all of the other werewolf movies in existence, I just have no use for this film, and I can't imagine why I would ever watch it again. So that's my thoughts, but I want to know yours. Did you see The Wolfman this weekend? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this and want to hang out with me more, you can click this right over here to hear my thoughts on all of the 2024 horror movies that I saw last year. Give it a like and a subscribe if you haven't yet. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.